Kit Brown-Hoekstra has been working with Simple. How long have you been with Simple A?
Almost 4 years now.
Yeah, and a longtime consultant in the industry, a past president of Society for Technical Communication. Kit and I have worked together in about four different companies, I think. So I've known her for quite some time. I'll let you introduce yourself further, and then we'll jump into content operations. She's gonna define it, and then we'll have a conversation about it.
I've been doing this work for, I know, far longer than I care to admit. And working largely in the space between technical communication and localization, helping create and implement strategy and operations across, when global companies are needing to implement a new content management system and have it talk to their localization team and so on. So a lot of operations experience. It's a huge topic, impacts every aspect of the organization, as you may already know. I wanted to use this time to plant some seeds and, basically start that conversation. I find it helps. I know all of you are familiar with what content operations is because you're probably leading teams that are doing this, but it helps to have a common definition of it. So it's the day-to-day business of acquiring, managing, and leveraging content, a management activity that monitors, evaluates, and guides the life cycle and the resulting content experience. So content operations basically answers the who, what, when, where, how questions. Content strategy answers the why questions. Content engineering is a little bit about the how and the what, but the content operations kind of brings the strategy and engineering together, is what actually makes the engine go. The key thing with operations, with being effective at operations, is that you need to be able to sit in that space between strategy and tactics so that you're not so far down in the weeds that you can't see the opportunities for changing the way you're doing it, because operations at its best is constantly changing and improving and innovating and optimizing and automating, right? So being strategic about those, being proactive instead of reactive about that is really key. And when you think about it, enterprise content and modular content, you saw this slide last week when Beth was talking about modeling, but when we think about content as it flows through the system in the enterprise, at the enterprise level, it's often very similar to an assembly line, right? Multiple authors from multiple different teams feed content into the content management system. It gets processed, inspected, evaluated, approved, and then it churns churned out at the other end into deliverables, assembled, if you will, into deliverables. And so anywhere in here that there is a bottleneck or a pinch point in the process can really, just like having literally a monkey wrench in the works in an actual physical assembly line, it can shut everything down. So part of what our responsibility is to recognize those problems before they happen, so that we have ways to mitigate that and mitigate the risk associated with when our system shuts down. So when you're thinking about content operations, let's talk about, I would like to hear everyone's baseline experience with content operations. What is it like for you at your current company or in past companies? What's your baseline experience with operations? I think that what you pointed out, Michael, is a really important point. Is that without governance and frameworks, it's really hard to get from unstructured content to where you want to be with the digital transformation and having intelligent content. The governance is a foundational aspect of that. So starting there is actually a really good thing. Okay, let's dive a little deeper. We talked about the definition. All of you are very familiar and embedded in content operations. At its best, What content operations does is systematize these things. So if you think about starting at the top of the pyramid and going down, the planning leads to policy, which leads to process, which leads to analysis and data gathering. And, a huge part of the metrics is the question we should always be asking in that analysis piece: are we measuring the right thing? And is the data telling us, answering the question we think we're asking? So, for example, if you're measuring authors on how much content they produce and rewarding them on that, that is one way of measuring their productivity. However, is that really the best way of measuring their productivity? Because sometimes, as Mark Twain said, I would have written a shorter letter, but I didn't have time, right? So sometimes less is more. Is writing more content and feeding more content into the system really the most effective way to reach your customers? Probably not. So part of that analysis and part of measuring, and unfortunately, the what we want to measure is complex, and there's not necessarily a direct one-to-one relationship between what we do and additional sales. So we have to learn to look at the overall picture and read below the level of just what is the statistic that we've collected. The same thing with quality. How do we measure quality in our content? It's a huge challenge. I mean, some of it's version control, some of it, we can measure version control, we can measure those things, but is quality how many times people go to the documentation? Probably not. So, you have to be thoughtful about not just looking at the raw data, but looking below the data. So one of the primary functions is to not only systematize, but also smooth out, identify those pain points, identify those pinch points, and then creating a proactive, conscious, intentional process rather than reacting to something that's coming down from on high. The problem is that the government gets a bad rap because it's seen as an obstacle. And it's seen as one-sided. It's seen as us dictating from on high versus collaboration, right? And the other thing is that teams will, if it takes them 5 minutes to find a piece of content in the system, they're just going to rewrite it. So we want to facilitate the standards across the organization coherently and interoperably so that we can ensure compliance and uniform governance. But we also need to listen to that feedback. We need to close that feedback loop, make sure that the authors and the other people involved in the content supply chain have ownership and a say in what's happening. And if something is really is a pinch point or a bottleneck, it's our job as leaders to remove the roadblocks for our teams, right? So that they can perform at their best. Just kind of summarizing what I'm saying is that asking generative questions, looking for the best of what was, what is, and what could be, leads to innovation, not just solving the immediate problem. So instead of asking what's wrong with our customer experience or why are so many people calling support about this issue, asking how might we create an exceptional customer experience? You see how those two questions feel differently. So just shifting a few words in that question, or shifting what questions we ask, we can identify opportunities for innovation, and then adjusting, making it flow. Be strategic about finding solutions.
Content and technology are constantly evolving. Procedures and strategy are ever advancing. Are you ready to lead your team into a more intelligent future? Bolster your content outcomes with A's Intelligent Content Leader Cohort, an 8-week remote learning course that will refine your approach to content. Slots for our next cohort are available now. Apply today. The program centers around 90-minute group learning sessions offered each week. Together we'll cover content management, semantic systems, content models, content operations, as well as change management. Plus, we'll add on some additional topics as requested by you and other participants of the cohort. Access to the cohort also includes direct one-on-one mentorship and strategy recommendations based on your objectives. Don't miss out on this opportunity to equip yourself with the knowledge and skills you need to stay ahead of the curve. For more details and to apply, click the link today.